So, Tara, we're ready to go when you are.
Okay. We have. Okay, I wasn't seeing everyone listed. Okay, it's 6 p.m. We'll call to order our special meeting for the date of March 30th, 2022. Can we get a roll call vote, Vanessa?
Commissioner Lopez.
Present.
Commissioner Valdez appears to be absent. Commissioner Franz.
Present.
Vice Chairperson Rodriguez Sajas.
Here.
Chairperson Isiano.
Present. Okay. Are we going right into this special meeting with?
Chair, we do have the items 2 through 4. That's next item is Pledge of Allegiance.
Okay. Commissioner Lopez, would you please lead us in our Pledge of Allegiance? Okay. This time, can we have a roll call, please?
Chair, we did the roll call. Are you and we did Pledge of Allegiance. I think the next item is public comment for items not on the agenda.
Okay, I'm sorry, I wasn't hearing the Pledge of Allegiance. I don't know if there's an audio issue.
My apologies.
Okay. Are there any public comments for items not on the agenda, Vanessa?
I don't believe I received any.
Okay. Then we will close the public comment.
Pardon, Chair, if I may, just to clarify also with Director Schneider that there's no one in attendance seeking to offer public comment at this point.
We do have one person in attendance, but he's here for the study session item.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Then being that we have a quorum, now shall we get started on the special meeting topics?
Certainly. So I'm going to turn it over quickly to our consultants, but before I do that, I did want to take 1 minute of your time and introduce a new staff member who you'll be seeing a lot more of. Alyssa, if you can stand, please. Alyssa Suarez is our acting senior planner. She came to us in January. She is an Indio native. Oh, there she is. She's an Indio native who went off for a while and most recently worked in Humboldt County. We were really lucky to get her back to Indio, and she's been doing amazing work in the short amount of time she's been here. I am very, very pleased to have her as a member of our team, and just wanted you all to say hello to Alyssa. And Alyssa, if you want to say anything to the commission, just head over to the podium.
Can you hear me? Hello, my name is Alyssa Suarez. As Kevin said, I just started about 2.5 months ago now, and it's a pleasure to work with the City of Indio. I recently moved back to the Coachella Valley in December of last year due to this position. So I'm really eager to be here and continue to support the planning division, the day-to-day operations, and you'll be hearing from me soon with some public hearing items. So it's nice to meet you all. Thank you.
Thank you. Welcome.
Just to note that Alyssa's responsibilities include supervising the planning team. So, and she's also obviously going to be working. And so you'll see her coming forward with various items in the future. And again, really happy to have her here. So with that, I want to just quickly remind the commission that we are in our study session mode right now for the draft zoning regulations, what we're referring to as the Unified Development Code. And this evening, Simran and Alessandra, who have spoken to you previously, are joining us, and they're going to take you through a presentation on draft Article 2, which, along with Article 3, is kind of the meat, if you will, of our code activity. I want to say a special thank you to Simran and Alessandra. They have been doing yeoman's work in getting us to this point, and they've done a great job in helping to bring this along. So with that, I'll turn it over to Simran and Alessandra. And once they've done their presentation, we're hoping that you will engage with us in a Q&A interaction, a question and answer interaction, so we can continue to move this project along and get it to its eventual conclusion by the end of the summer with hopefully a city council approval with your recommendations. Thank you.
Good evening, Chair Yaciano, Vice Chair Seha, and other members of the Planning Commission. Nice to see you all again. Again, I'm Simran Malhotra, Principal with Ramey and Associates, and with me I have Alessandra Landine, and we've been working on the zoning code update for the last coming up on 2 years now. And so we are very glad to present a more detailed update on a portion of the zoning code, which is Article 2. This is the specific to zone regulations. So we have a presentation for you, and we'll stop at a couple of points along the way to answer any questions that you might have. That's the overview of the agenda. As you know, the zoning code update is a comprehensive update of chapters 150 and 159 of the municipal code. And the primary goal is to create a consistent, modern, well-organized, highly illustrated document. The update is also intended to ensure consistency with the general plan that was adopted in 2019 and address recent changes in state law. I think we've shared this slide previously with you, and the city has sent out a mailer to all residents in the city, informing them about the project. There is a project website as a part of the city's website, and that includes information about the 6 study sessions we are having with you all. It also has presentations as well as the draft code available for anyone to review. We also have created an online interactive map-based portal where someone can go in and look at the individual property and see what the current zoning is, what the proposed zoning is, and then as well as the if there is a change to their general plan designation, which, as we had discussed last time, was necessary for some cleanup and consistency issues. So the zoning code is now being considered as a comprehensive unified development code. So it's organized a little bit differently than what you have been used to over the last many years. It's organized under 6 major sections or articles. And I'll go through these briefly, and then we'll dive into more detail on one of these later on in the presentation. So the Unified Development Code is organized in 6 articles. The first article includes purpose and authority. It establishes the zone, adds reference to the zoning map, and then has a section on how to use the code. Article 2, which is the meat of our presentation today, covers zone regulations for all specific zones. Article 3 will cover general development standards that apply citywide, and these include landscaping, lighting, parking, etc. Sign regulations are also a part of Article 3, and we had presented these and received your feedback in February, the first study session. Article 4 will include special uses and standards that are specific to those uses. Included are standards for animal keeping, cottage food operations, automobile fuel stations, outdoor storage, thrift shops, and temporary uses, to name a few. The next meeting in April is when we'll go over Article 4 in more detail. Article 5 is a placeholder for subdivision regulations, and then Article 6 covers the permits and procedures needed for project approvals. This article is a comprehensive update as well. Again, there's several state laws, especially related to ministerial approval for housing projects, and those have been addressed as a part of this section. So zooming in a little bit on Article 2, this is organized by zone type. So in big buckets, if you can think of residential zones, mixed-use zones, non-residential zones, public and institutional zones, specific plans and PMP zones, those are existing for the most part, and then overlays, which are established in certain portions of the city. So for each zone type, we have use tables and development standards, and these have been organized in a table format. These tables then allow us an easy and clear way to compare regulations across zones. The example on the screen shows the tables for the use and development standards for mixed-use zones, and I'll try and zoom in here so you can see a little bit more closely. So this is the use table for mixed-use zones. The uses are organized and grouped topically. So you have agriculture uses, and as you scroll down in the table, there are residential uses, dining and entertainment, retail and office, education and public assembly, automobile-related uses, recreation uses, industrial and manufacturing, to name a few. This table shows all those uses going vertically, and then the mixed uses going across. And you can see whether a use is allowed, if it's conditionally allowed, if it's an accessory use, if it needs an accessory use permit or a temporary use permit. And then this final column shows if there are any additional specific uses that need to be referred to, and it contains the section reference for those. So this will make it very easy for both the applicant and the planner to be able to quickly dive into what's allowed on a specific piece of property. Similarly, the development standards table lists the various development standards going vertically and the standards and the zones going across. And we'll get into a little bit more detail on the development standards in the second part of the presentation. Now a little bit more detail of the zone types. This is the citywide zoning map that we had shared last time, and I'm just showing this as a reminder, but the purpose of it is to focus on the types of zones in a little bit more detail. So in terms of residential zones, we have 5 residential zones. Each has a minimum and a maximum density established, and that's reflected in the minimum lot size required in each of those zones. And allowed uses for each zone, and then development standards for them are included as I described on the previous slide. So the 5 zones are Desert Estates 1, which allows up to 1 unit per acre, Desert Estates Transition, which allows up to 3 units an acre. Suburban Neighborhood 4 goes to 4 units an acre. Suburban Neighborhood 8 is a minimum density of 4 units and maximum of 8 units an acre. And then the mobile home zone goes to 10 units or 10 lots per acre. In terms of mixed-use zones, and these are new zones that needed to be established for consistency with the general plan. And there are 5 mixed-use zones. These are the primary purpose of these zones is to provide housing at higher densities while including commercial uses in appropriate locations. Sites can have standalone residential, and that can be organized either horizontally or in vertical format. So either commercial in the front, residential in the back, or commercial below and residential above. In the NC zone, you can also have standalone commercial uses. Some of these zones have a minimum threshold while others don't. For example, mixed-use neighborhood has a 20 units per acre minimum density with a 40 units per acre maximum density. This will include, allows for a variety of housing types, from the middle housing types, row houses, to apartment and podium type development. And then it will also include and allow neighborhood serving retail, general commercial, entertainment, and office type uses. The neighborhood center, the focus is primarily neighborhood serving commercial, but residential uses are allowed on those sites as well. And for the most part, these are reflective of existing shopping centers across the city. Moving on to non-residential zones, there are 4 commercial and industrial zones. Regional commercial, heavy industrial, light industrial, and resource recovery. Resource recovery is focused on mining and extraction activities. Again, this is reflecting what's already there for the most part. The regional commercial zone is focused on large format retail, services, hotels, visitor serving commercial, and it also allows for parks and open space, which is allowed across all zones. The industrial uses are split up into heavy uses, the more polluting type of uses, which are more focused on certain areas where they have more limited impact on existing residential. And the light industrial uses include offices, business parks, research and development, warehouses, those that are more compatible with or near residential uses, as well as other corridor commercial uses. Public and institutional zones, these are, as you might expect, include civic facilities, libraries, community centers, senior centers, police, fire, schools, both public and private, as well as higher education facilities. Parks and open space include golf courses, parks, other active and passive recreation uses, as well as for habitat management. The 4 overlay zones that are being carried through from the old zoning code, and the major music festival overlay is an existing overlay and is continuing as is. The resource management and open space overlay is related to the CVMSHCP and is also being continued as is. Plan development is an overlay that's applied on a case-by-case basis when a project comes through. The properties that have a PD will continue to have that designation. If at any time the PD designation goes, that project, if the PD designation is no longer applied to that property, then base zoning would need to be applied to those properties. And the same applies to specific plans and project master plans. The city has many specific plans and PMPs in place right now, and there is the question if those should continue as is, or if there should be a base zoning applied to those instead, and the specific plans dissolved. That's something we'd like your feedback on. And with that, I will pause for some questions, and then we can dive into the development standards in a little bit more detail.
Any commissioner questions?
Sure, if I may. Simona, thank you for that presentation. Very informative. I'm curious as to what would be the benefits for the individual zoning for those individual plans. What would be the benefit and sort of the pros and the cons?
Vice Chair Seha, could you expand on that question? I'm not sure I totally understand your question.
So for your last comment, you were saying that there would be like individual zoning. I guess I might have misunderstood what you just said, but you were saying that the question is, and you would want our feedback as to whether we want individual zoning. So I'm curious as to what would be the benefit of doing individual zoning or not.
I say, I apologize. What I was saying was that there are specific plans across the city that are built out, and those have specific regulations within them. The discussion we've had with Director Snyder has been whether it makes sense to continue those specific plans as is, because instead of referring to just one document, which is the zoning code or the unified development code, there are all these different documents that a planner needs to refer to if there are any changes or any additional projects that happen within those areas. So if a specific plan is mostly built out, it may be beneficial to have just regular zoning on those properties instead of the specific plan.
And if I could add, as Siron said, we have a number of existing specific plans and project master plans in the city, which in essence are zoning applied to the affected properties. In the general plan, one of the action items has been identified is to eventually to evaluate existing specific plans and determine whether or not they should continue to be applicable or the zoning that will implement the general plan could be applied. This will not occur immediately. It's a large undertaking, but it is a question that we would like your feedback on, because for example, there's a gateway specific plan, which is a large specific plan in northwest portion of the city. It covers probably close to 1,000 acres. It has not produced much development to date, and it's been in effect since the early 2000s. So as an example where it might be worth investigating whether or not that specific plan would continue to be applicable, we'd have to go through the legal mechanisms to remove it. But in its place, we would put in the implementing zoning for the general plan designation, the zoning we're talking about tonight. So that's an example where it may not make sense to continue to have a specific plan, particularly if it's not produced any results. And it may be something to look at. That specific plan was written in a different time. So for example, the highest density you can do in that specific plan is 10 dwelling units to the acre. And this city has embraced density, and where there would be potential for mixed use zoning, you could be looking at much higher density. But under that specific plan, you would be limited to 10 dwelling units to the acre. So that's an example of, I think, what Simran was referring to, whether it's in the best interest of the city long term in terms of applying the general plan through implementing zoning, whether it's in the best interest of the city to have some of these specific plans and project master plans, particularly those that have not gone anywhere, continue to be in effect.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. Kevin, it sounds like this is very much correlated to what conversations we've had, where even as things are coming up to the Planning Commission and we're exploring, whether something should be approved or not. And we're saying there's all these different plans and there's all these different things that we need to be referencing in order to be able to come back with, an educated roadmap as to how we should be voting. Is that would this process simplify that? Would we be able to maybe, and I understand this is not something that we were probably going to do in the very near future, but is that something that we would, is that really the question? Should we be looking at these specific plans, analyzing, saying, can we embed some of those, specific like design parameters that we suggested, or things that are embedded in these specific plans to be added into our zoning? Is that what, I guess it's more really of a clarifying question. I want to understand truly what would be the sort of the transition, and how would we be able to still get all of the sort of intentions for those plans into our zoning.
So if you, two responses. One is our city has a lot of specific plans and master plans, more than I've ever seen anywhere else. And I think that in my professional opinion, specific plans, the new general plan does not actually allow for project master plans anymore. Its specific plans are allowed by state law, but we can establish the parameters under which they can occur. And and it may be that for the realization of the vision of the general plan that this planning commission and the city council ultimately brought to fruition, you would want the implementing zoning in effect as much as possible versus specific plans, particularly those that are older that were developed under the previous general plan. So that's number one. The goal of the zoning regulations is to implement the general plan. So in an ideal situation, there would be no need for a specific plan unless it was a very unique situation where it was a unique development opportunity that that our zoning regulations didn't adequately cover, but that could present potential community benefit that we wanted to capture. But that would also hopefully be on a limited basis. What we're putting in front of you, what Simran and Alessandra and the Indio staff have been working on, is to try to provide a broad net under, if you will, traditional zoning where you wouldn't need the specific plan approach.
Thank you. That was very helpful. Thank you to both.
Thank you, Kevin. Commissioners Franz or Lopez, any questions?
No, not at this time. Thank you.
Okay, I don't have any questions for staff either right now, Kevin. So thank you. Thank you, Simran.
So the next element is they wanted to present on the development standards. So Simran and Alessandra are going to lead you through this conversation now and hopefully get your thoughts and feedback if you have any.
Thank you, Kevin. Good evening, commissioners. As Kevin just mentioned, I'm going to walk through kind of an overview of our zone-specific development and design standards. Next slide. So I think Simran kind of mentioned this when we talked a little bit about the overall kind of hierarchy and the Article 2 organization. But basically, for every grouping of zones, we have development standards that are organized into these tables, making it really easy to see all the standards all in one location and really compare the standards side by side for similar zones. And you can kind of see that in the screenshot here. So in terms of what we're covering in the tables, it's lot and density standards such as minimum and maximum density and maximum FAR. In the case of non-residential uses, we have minimum lot size, width and depth, and lot coverage. We have building height expressed in both maximum feet and stories. And then we also have minimum and maximum setbacks for, of course, front, street side, interior side, and rear of properties. We also define them for both the building site and individual lots. And I'll talk a little bit more about what that means on some of the coming slides. And we also have setbacks for mixed use defined for ground floor residential versus non-residential. And that's because when you have non-residential ground floor uses, you want to put those a little bit closer to the sidewalk and the street to create a pedestrian friendly environment. And of course, if you have a multifamily building, and you have ground floor residential, you would want to set those back a little bit farther from the street to create some more privacy for those units. We also define minimum usable open space. And I'll talk a little bit more about that when I get to the small lot and mixed use and multifamily standards. And we have minimum landscaping requirements as well in those tables. Next slide. So this slide just shows you again kind of a screenshot of what one of those tables looks like with all of the standards laid out really easily side by side. And then we also have a number of graphics throughout the code that kind of illustrate some of these development standards and make it really clear what we mean and how to calculate some of them, such as determining lot coverage. Next slide. So I'm now going to talk about a few different types of development. These are all kind of a little bit new to the code that really weren't covered in the existing code. And one of those is small lot detached single family residential. This is sometimes referred to a little bit as a missing middle housing type. And what do we mean by this? So we've defined these as small lot detached homes on a maximum lot size of 4,000 square feet, and the maximum unit size is about 2,500 square feet. So again, small lots with kind of smaller individual units on them. And we have that maximum unit size so that these are enormous homes on these tiny lots. Next slide. So we've really kind of calibrated the development standards really carefully to this kind of denser small lot detached housing type. So what does this mean? So this translates into, of course, kind of narrower setbacks that might be typical for kind of a standard single family lot, and higher allowed lot coverage standards. Small lot single family developments could occur as part of a larger subdivision, but often they can take the form of 2 to 5 small lot homes built on an infill parcel, like the site plan example you see on the bottom right of the slide. So for certain zones, we provided both a minimum and a maximum setback for both the overall building site, as well as the individual lots within it. We also have standards aimed at limiting parking frontage along the primary or public street to ensure that kind of garages don't dominate the building facade. In most cases, we provide a total combined square footage of required open space per unit. And then we further define the minimum that must be provided as private open space. And this provides developers with flexibility to determine the configuration of private versus common open space that they provide in the development, but it also ensures that each unit has a minimum amount of private open space in either a yard or a balcony or what have you. Next slide. So we've also developed a number of objective design standards for small lot detached single family homes that go along with those development standards. So we cover site planning standards such as access and connectivity, landscaping requirements, where parking should be located, and then services and utilities such as mailboxes and trash receptacles in areas. We have building and facade design standards. So depending on the number of units in a development, a certain number of different architectural variations or building models are required. We have modulation and articulation requirements for housing. We define standards for building entries, making sure that primary entries are fronting onto public streets. We have standards for roof forms, colors and materials, as well as neighborhood transitions and privacy. So for example, offsetting windows to avoid direct sight lines into adjacent homes and the like. And then of course, again, we have kind of, if a developer chooses to provide common open space, we have specifications for how common open spaces should be designed.
Alessandra moves on. She used the term objective design standards. You're going to hear that a lot as it relates to residential. And maybe Alessandra, could you just take a moment and explain that?
Yes. So I'm trying to remember if we covered this very briefly in a previous presentation. maybe we didn't, Simran is not shaking her head. But due to recent state laws, namely SB 330, among others, the state now requires that for all residential uses and mixed use developments that include at least 2/3 of the square footage as residential, a city cannot impose subjective design guidelines for those projects. So all design, we can't really have guidelines anymore. They have to be clear and objective design standards. So all residential, so that basically, that's why we've developed objective design standards for this project.
And just to add to that real fast, what that means is that we will be, if we were to go down the path of being subjective, when we had adopted objective design standards, that would be a basis for for challenge. Because again, the state has mandated that we have these objective design standards, removing the potential for subjectivity, so that, and this is all with the goal of trying to get more housing out of the ground, right? So it's really trying to take away the idea that delays and other things can happen through subjective determinations.
Exactly. It's all part of kind of housing, streamlining of the permitting and approval process. Simran, did you want to add anything to that before we move on?
Yeah, all I would add is the purpose of the objective design standards is to make it very clear to an applicant and the decision maker that what applies and what can be used as a basis to deny a project. So if a project comes in and it meets all the objective standards, the city would have no legal grounds to deny that project. And what that does is it helps move projects along faster with the goal of creating more housing, as opposed to projects taking years and years of design and redesign and so on to get approved. This has been an issue in other communities more so than India, but the state's laws, of course, apply to all cities within California.
Yeah, actually, I think now that since we're on this slide, I can provide a quick example. So in the past, you might have had a very vague design guideline that said something like, small lot subdivision must provide architectural variability. And you can't say that anymore because it's very subjective. What does that actually mean? How much? And so now, we have an objective design standard that literally says, if you have, if the building site or the subdivision or what have you contains 4 to 8 units, you have to have a minimum of 2 facade designs. So it's very clearly spelled out. And there's kind of a benchmark to measure against.
Before we move on, is that pretty clear to the commission? Because again, you're going to hear a lot about objective design standards as it relates to residential, that we're doing this because we have to, and we're doing it to meet a legal test, and it will limit the commission's authority in terms of applying subjective design thoughts or ideas to a project. So I just want to make sure that that's clear to the commission. Is there any other questions around the objective design standards approach? Okay, thank you.
Next slide, Simran. Okay, so next I'm going to talk about mixed use and multifamily residential development and design standards. So when we talk about mixed use, this could mean either vertical or horizontal mixed use. So residential either above or behind retail or non-residential ground floor uses. And then for multifamily housing, this includes a number of different housing types. So it could be attached single family, so townhomes, duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, small kind of courtyard apartments, and low to mid-rise apartments and condos. Next slide. So again, we've calibrated the development standards very specifically to these types of developments and this variety of multifamily housing types. So we have, of course, kind of narrower setbacks, particularly for ground floor commercial, as I mentioned earlier. We have established a minimum ground floor commercial height. And that's really to ensure that commercial spaces are well designed and usable for commercial tenants. We have, again, I mentioned building site versus individual lot setback standards. Generally for the mixed use and multifamily developments, we don't have those zones, we don't have a maximum lot coverage, and that's because these are kind of higher density development types. We also require that parking must be located to the rear or side of buildings, and that's to ensure that parking doesn't dominate the street frontage and to provide a more pedestrian-oriented environment. And then again, we defined a total required square footage of open space per unit with a minimum amount of private open space required per unit. Again, providing that flexibility to developers, but making sure that there's a good amount of open space for these multifamily developments. And then lastly, we have height transitions adjacent to low density neighborhoods, and I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail on a coming slide. So in terms of design standards for mixed use and multifamily residential, this slide kind of provides the high level topic areas that we go into. So we have site planning standards, access and connectivity. So this includes standards such as maximum block size, block length, requirements for pedestrian connections through sites. We have service and utility standards. So this includes locating service and utility functions or areas to the rear and side of buildings and providing appropriate screening of both ground mounted and roof mounted equipment. We also have a number of standards on refuse and recycling areas and the design of trash enclosures. We have, of course, a very large section on building massing and articulation. Oh, actually, go back for a second, Simran. Yes, so we have building massing and articulation, and I'm going to talk about that a little bit more on the next slide. And we have our, open space design requirements. So this is for both private and common open space. So we have included, for instance, minimum dimensions for balconies. And then we have neighborhood transition standards. So if you have a higher density multifamily or mixed use building adjacent to a low density zone, such as single family zone, we have built in standards for reducing and stepping down heights adjacent to those single family homes, making sure that there are kind of appropriate transitions and privacy. And then lastly, we have performance standards for mixed use developments. Since sometimes there can be a conflict between non-residential uses and residential uses in the same building. If you think about, say, restaurants creating kind of noise or odor. So we have regulations on, again, noise, odor, and then of course, and then also hours of operation for non-residential uses, making sure that those uses aren't creating any kind of nuisance issues for residents. Next slide, Simran. So I want to get into a little bit more detail on massing and articulation design standards. This covers kind of the key topic areas we get into, or that the design standards fall within. So we define required massing breaks, both major and minor massing breaks, depending on the length of the building. We require that multi-story buildings use design techniques to define a clear base, middle, and top. And you kind of see that illustrated in the graphics on the right-hand side of the slide. We define a facade, rhythm, and pattern and how that can be achieved through modulation, articulation, and building fenestration. We define window fenestration requirements and also even the treatment of corner buildings. So providing special corner treatments to corner buildings. And then in many cases, the standards are written with a menu of options to choose from to provide developers with flexibility on how they choose to achieve them or to achieve that standard. And then lastly, we have an array of diagrams that really help illustrate many of the more complex massing and articulation standards so that it's clear what's required and how it can be achieved. I think that
And if I can
concludes.
add something.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead, Simran.
Yeah, sorry, Alessandra. I was going to just add that you would typically not see this level of detail about architecture in a zoning code, but going back to the whole issue of the requirement for objective design standards, by codifying those standards as a part of the Unified Development Code, the city is providing those standards in a very clear manner here, so that applicant knows right off the bat what are they required to do in order to have a project approved within the city.
For one additional thought for the commission is, so in your previous review efforts, you've heard me multiple times tell you that we don't have the regulations for the things you want to do. Well, this is getting us closer. It is required, at least for the housing side of the aisle, and it limits your flexibility, but it also, I think, answers a lot of the questions you've been asking over the years, which, at least in the context of being able to be clear about what the design parameters are. And this gives you that context. It is night and day different from our current regulations, which were written primarily back in the mid-90s and have been modified over the years somewhat, but not substantially. This is a wholesale rewrite and redo to make us current with the state requirements. So this level of detail means for the commission, as you go through future review efforts, assuming this all gets adopted by the city council ultimately, you will have to pay attention to all these design standards as they apply to a project, which is going to be different. And we're all going to learn together. I can guarantee you that, because that has not been something that this city has done. Normally, even the specific plans we've adopted have been somewhat generic. This is very detailed, but we honestly have no choice. So I don't want to be a downer at all, but that's just the reality. And what we've tried to do here, and I think Simran said it really well, we've tried to make it as clear as possible to the applicants of what's expected of them, so that by the time they're in front of you, your job is more checking them than guiding them.
Certainly, that makes a lot of sense. Thank you. Are we taking any commission questions at this time then for?
Definitely.
Okay.
Love to hear from the commission. Any thoughts, questions, ideas?
Whoever would like to chime in, please.
Did put some primer questions up there if you were not sure what you wanted to ask as a starting point for discussion, but these aren't hopefully the only questions or thoughts or ideas you might have.
I guess my question, I know that you were saying that, we're following this to allow for housing, such a need, that the design standards, but these will apply to all development across the city? Or is this just a concentration into how we're designing, housing or like mixed use?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, and I'll let Alessandra and or Simran elaborate, but I'll give you a short response. So we are mandated to have objective design standards for single family residential and mixed use when it's over 50% of the development. We will be bringing to you, as you get into the commercial, you'll see more detailed standards, because bluntly, we don't have any today as at the level we should. We have parking standards and like that, but the building architectural, we don't. So you'll have more things to work with. You'll have more flexibility in your consideration of them. But the objective design standards that Alessandra and Simran have been talking with you about are really in response to what the state has mandated. So it is a process we have to follow, but in the non-residential, in the commercial or the industrial, you'll have, it will be a little bit more guidance then checking. You'll have more opportunity to engage with that. But we will have more clear standards, because part of the goal of this Unified Development Code is to remove the challenges of dealing with our current code, which is often vague, sometimes more than sometimes unclear. And been doing this 30 years, and even I struggle sometimes with our current zoning regulations. I don't know if Alessandra or Sim want to add to what I said.
Go ahead, Alexandra.
Oh, yes, I was just going to reiterate, as Kevin was mentioning, I think I just wanted to clarify. So yes, so the state requirements are that you need objective design standards for residential of more than one unit and mixed use with over 2/3 residential. So we didn't develop design standards for kind of individual single family homes, but we did define them for small lot single family homes, thinking that might be a development type that the city could likely see based on the general plan direction for kind of slightly higher density, if that makes sense.
Yes. So other single family homes that are not really considered small lot single family homes will not have all the same guidelines and requirements. They'll have a little bit more, they'll have more options as far as design requirements and such.
So if there's a single lot in a neighborhood that someone wants to build a home on, the regular design guidelines can apply. But if someone is coming in and building a tract or a small lot subdivision, then the objective design standards would apply. So
What
if
if
it's
it was
a one-off thing?
What if it was a tract with larger lots? Because this small lot was 4,000 square foot lots, correct? Okay,
These apply. Mhm.
thank you.
Chair, what Alessandra presented to you was an example. But so, for example, if we have west of us, we have an older neighborhood, and if we had a vacant lot there, then we would not be looking at as necessarily these objective design standards. But the commission just reviewed a recent subdivision, Cocoa Palms, and if that came in after these regulations were adopted, you would be reviewing them against the objective design standards. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you.
I have a question. Is that okay, Chair?
Please.
Thank you. I just want to make sure I understand something. The last few years, we have encouraged developers to come before us for a study session to discuss design, what they see, what they're working on before they get to the point of actually coming before us. So based on what you just said, Kevin, it's going to be more checking instead of guiding. So does that mean that basically the developers are not going to be very much too interested in coming to us for guidance? They're just going to look and say, if this is what the rules are, then as long as we meet the minimums, that's pretty much all we have to do.
So that's a great question. And I think it's going to be situational. I think that those that see value in coming before you and having conversations, yes, the conversation will be somewhat more controlled because of the objective design standards. But hopefully we'll still have those conversations. Your feedback on other things can still be applied. But when we get into what Alessandra covered, it's going to be a little bit more, make sure you're following this kind of conversation. Not that there won't be some opportunity to talk about other things, but as it relates, that's going to be where the conversation has to go.
So right now, as we are going through these zoning and these guidance, we as the commission need to be real careful what we put in here, because once it's here, unless you go back to making some major changes, you're not going to be making a whole lot of changes to the zoning very easily once the council approves it, correct?
Yes and no. The objective design standards are going to be pretty tight. So once we have them in place, we can add standards, but they still have to be objective. So over time, no zoning ordinance or set of regulations, in my experience, is ever static. There's always going to be things that the planning commission and or the city council or the community wants to see, or we're going to have to consider in response to future conditions we haven't thought about today. But when it gets to the objective design standards, you do have there's more controls in place, I guess is the best way to say it. Now, when we're dealing with the non-residential, again, you have more flexibility, the commercial, the industrial, than you do when what we're talking about with the residential. But I suspect, in fact, Simran and Allison and I were talking about this recently, probably 6 months after the zoning regulations are adopted, there's going to be probably one or two things that are going to pop up that either weren't considered at the time when we brought this through, because I've never been involved in one of these where we didn't know about something coming down the pike. We didn't anticipate it because we can't anticipate everything, or we need to address something because its implementation didn't exactly go the way we wanted it to.
Okay, so there was a slide in here that had samples of, they look like townhouses to me, right? Some were a little more modern, some were a little more traditional, some were very old school, right? So when we are putting in these guidelines, for example, currently modern is a little more popular, correct? But when I first joined the commission a couple of years ago, the commissioners that sat up here at that time were very much interested in something more Santa Barbara, I guess was the look.
Spanish Mediterranean look.
There you go, Spanish Mediterranean look. And so because we're being so specific in here, is there still going to be room for the developers to be a little creative so that maybe not every single development starts to look exactly the same, and that there's no room for change 5, 10, 15, 20 years down the road without major revisions?
That's a great question. Alessandra, could maybe you discuss that? Maybe we can go back to the listing of various things, colors and materials, things like that. But would you help respond to that? Because I think it's a really good question.
Yes, that is a very good question to kind of clarify. So the way we've structured the design standards, we're trying to kind of get at a minimum level of kind of architectural interest and variability, but we aren't defining, say, architectural styles. These are standards that can be achieved through any architectural style, Spanish, modern, what have you. And again, we've also provided a menu of options for a lot of these. So if we say, I think for our articulation standard, we say like use, at a minimum 2 of the following, articulation design treatments. And then there's a menu of options that they can choose from. Simran, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I would just add that so to answer your question, Commissioner, right now we're really focusing on modern and contemporary as a city, both in the residential and non-residential. And what I think Alessandra just said is we can still focus on the modern and contemporary, but the articulation, the massing, things like that, that's where you get to the objective design standard. But if we say our preference is modern, contemporary, we can still say that. Or if we suddenly go back and say our preference is Spanish Mediterranean again, we can say that. And about what's going to be a little bit different is in that when we say that, then we're going to point them to this and say, as you develop your products, keep these standards in mind.
Okay. With that in mind, if a developer came to us with something that met all the minimums, but the style was something the city as a whole is not really working with and doesn't want, is that going to give us enough authority to say, you meet all these minimums, but you're not meeting the design that we're looking for our city? Is that enough for us to be able to say, we will not approve you if you do not change your design?
The short answer is likely yes. But and Simran's going to not like what I say. Simran's the legal part of the team here. I say likely yes because it's within limited parameters. I'll let Simran take over right now because she's probably gonna kill me offline. and Zach probably is going to do the same too. But likely yes, but with some parameters. And Simran, jump in because I know you want to say something.
Sure, and I'll defer to Zach for the legal, rationale for it. But I actually want to step back and talk about this at a different level first. Commissioner Franz, you asked earlier that today you have applicants or developers come to you for a study session before they actually get too far with their design. And that allows the commission to provide them with some general feedback about, and maybe style is a part of that discussion. So they know when they go design their project and come back, it's something that the planning commission would likely approve. That study, the state law has also put in a limit to number of public hearings that a project needs to can go through. There's a limit of 5 total hearings, and that includes appeals. So the city can use one of those hearings at a start of a project if they so like, or a developer may come in and out of self-interest want to come to the city at their own behest to have that conversation with the commission. But to go back to what Kevin was saying earlier, the planning commission, if a project comes in and meets the design standards in the Unified Development Code, if it's adopted as is, if a project meets those, the planning commission, my understanding is, may not deny that project just on the basis of architectural style.
And Simran's right. I'm going to jump in. I said likely yes, because here's my caveat. If the commission wanted to recommend to the city council for lack of a better word, a menu of preferred architectural styles in the city and embedded that in the code, that would help the commission in what the commissioner described. But the counter to that is exactly what you said a little bit earlier, Commissioner. Styles and tastes change. So does that mean that every single time, we're modern contemporary now and suddenly we're back to Spanish Mediterranean, we're going to have to go and modify the code? Maybe. So the devil's in the details. So I think Simran's exactly right what she said, and that the likely would be if you gave context in the zoning regulations to the preferences. For example, I'm trying to think of, I believe in the downtown specific plan, we kind of did this a little bit to represent architectural preference. We didn't not necessarily listed anything, but we made very clear about the modern contemporary in the downtown specific plan. So that would be my approach. That'd be my recommended approach. Now, I don't know if Zach wants to weigh in from a legal perspective, but that's how I would caveat it.
Well, yeah, one thing I'll offer up to the extent that it's helpful in understanding this conversation is that the statutory definition that they've used for objective standards here, just to get an idea of what's being referenced, and again, kind of the genesis for some of these objective standards that Simran and Alessandra and city staff have put together. So objective standards are those that involve no personal or subjective judgment by a public official in being uniformly verifiable by reference to an external and uniform benchmark or criterion available and knowable by both the development applicant or proponent and the public official. So essentially that definition focuses on something that's objective, that all can read and understand what the criteria is, and eliminates the personal or subjective judgment to the extent that that would factor into approval or disapproval of a project.
And to put that into an example, if the Unified Development Code said all residential homes shall have and I'm going to use the term generically, we'd have to define a little bit better, but a modern contemporary architectural theme, and written in a way that was objective more than what I just stated, then that would be, I think, an example of what Zach's talking about. If we're loosey-goosey, so to speak, and we just say, yeah, the commission will figure the architectural team out, that's where we would fail.
Yes, you'd have to very, very clearly define what that style means. And I think it would still be really difficult for someone to judge what could be included in that. But then also it means that if you're saying, oh, you can only do this one style or two styles or three styles, then all of your buildings could only be those, those three styles. There's no flexibility then.
And then you run the risk of getting to that sameness that you expressed concern about earlier. Yeah.
So basically the devil's in the details, and we need to decide what we see or what we think the council and the general plan is trying to do and what our city will look like in the next 20 to 30 years. I mean, what happens after that? I'll be too old and won't be involved, but then there might have to be some changes. But so this is something I just wanted to bring this up more to my fellow commissioners, that we really need to be real careful at the end of this, what it is we're recommending.
Right. And so this is the appropriate time. For example, if the commission as a majority of the commissioners said, we would like the staff and consultants to go back and develop some language around this architectural theme, theme of perspective, then we would come back. We'd work, with Zach as well to make sure it's very tightly written in a legally valid way. And then that would be something that we could bring back to you that you could review at a later date. So that's the purpose of these study sessions, is exactly what we're talking about tonight. There's pluses and minuses to what we're talking about. You could express something, and that something could be in effect for a while in terms of what the market prefers. And then, who knows what's going to be the style 10 years from now. As Alessandra pointed out, we would have to be very, very clear about what that entails and what it looks like. There would be no room for subjectiveness. Yeah.
I have a sort of like a follow-up. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, I was just going to add one more thing to close the loop on the topic, and that was that, cities authentically grow over time, and architectural style is often a point-in-time representation of what's going on. So when we work in, and we work in cities all across California, we generally don't write design standards focusing on only allowing certain styles, and it's only in very few communities that it actually works. We all know Santa Barbara and the Santa Barbara style, but it's focused on State Street for the most part and some specific neighborhoods. It isn't even the entire city, and it works there. And one could do that potentially in portions of India, but it's applying it artificially to some extent. Authentically, if you had different architectural styles in different neighborhoods across the city, I think that's a welcome way to create a diversity of experiences. What we do write in is that on one building, you don't have elements of a craftsman style home with a Spanish style roof with a contemporary look, balcony or other such elements. We don't want that hodgepodge happening, and the standards prevent that. But in terms of buildings across the city or developments across the city, they can have different architectural styles. At least that's how we have written them.
So my question is less about the style, because I feel that, as you all have stated, it's very subjective. It depends who's at the commission and who, what the commission is into at the time. So I like this idea of standardizing something that, you know, the community can expect in the long term, the applicants can expect in the long term, and then figuring out how we add a little bit of color and flavor to it. However, my question is more in regards to some of the things that are happening. For example, the environmental impact plan, where we're talking about things like carbon sequestration, which is something that has come up. Is, you know, we're building these giant parking lots, but the landscape, for example, is not robust, and it's not, even though it might meet CEQA standards, for example. You know, we as a city and the community have expressed a desire for above and beyond standards. And so is this the moment? Is this where we're able to do that? Is that too subjective? And so I guess just trying to understand, we as a city have already started talking about these things and put it into plans. How do we bring some of that into this process so that as, you know, new multifamily residential projects are coming in, or these mixed use projects are moving forward, that they're taking these types of things into consideration? So, you know, shade is a very important thing for a region. And so I guess I'm just curious as to how do we embed that into this process now to make sure that it's living within the zoning? Because in the past, they have, you know, applicants have come and we have said more robust, more trees, more this, but there is really nothing that sort of gives us the authority to be able to do that. And so I'm just curious as to how do we go about that, and then, you know, what's sort of the next steps to move that forward.
Alessandra, Simran, do you want to respond?
Very good. Sure, Kevin. Very good question, Vice Chair Seha. We have, in a future meeting, we'll spend a lot of time talking about Article 3, which are the general development standards. And those apply to development across the city and are not as focused in specific zones. Those include parking standards, landscaping standards, you know, how are fences and walls treated, how do you design for for Indio's climate. So those standards are all embedded in Article 3, and that will give, and those are very robust compared to what you have today. So those give, again, the commissioners a way to, well, the applicant must follow those standards. So you will get projects which are designed more appropriately to what the general plan vision was.
Yeah, thank you. That clarifies it, because it's always of concern, and this is actually something that has happened to this commission since I've been part of the commission now, is that, you know, people have come up and said, no, it's not, you know, you're saying that CEQA is not required for this type of project because it's meeting the general plan recommendations, and by that, you know, we don't need to do any sort of further environmental impact assessment. And so and people, the community has brought up for certain different types of projects, they've said, no, you know, we're not so sure that that is the case. And so for me, it's almost sort of like being able to very clearly define, you know, how it is that we are implementing these sort of interventions into our zoning. And so I appreciate you clarifying where the opportunity for that will be.
Vice Chairperson, I just want to clarify one thing. So the zoning code update by itself is not addressing CEQA. CEQA is a statutory guidance. So things relating to conduct of environmental assessments are regulated under the statutes of the state. But I think to your point earlier, is there have been things over the time as we've done development review for various projects where questions have been asked about certain environmentally oriented actions that the city currently does not have any regulatory authority. So this is the time for the commission, as you and as Simran pointed out, Article 3 is really where that conversation would occur for you as a commission to decide what do you want to recommend to the city council and in terms of the issue areas that you have discussed in the past, whether it be At one point, the commission several times have talked about, requiring carports over parking, or not carports, but covered parking areas. And that's a development standard. So that is something you could talk about. You've talked about, having more robust landscaping or more desert-friendly landscaping. And that is something that you can discuss. You've talked about perhaps not having as much parking as has been shown on some of the projects, and that's an opportunity. And I'm speaking more in the commercial or non-residential orientation right now, because that's where a lot of these conversations have occurred. That this is the opportunity; these study sessions are the opportunity for you to get that on the proverbial floor, so that we, as staff and the consultant team, know what your thoughts are, that we can bring it forward when we get into the formal process as you develop your recommendations to City Council.
Thank you, Kevin. Do we have another topic to review after this?
No.
Ron, Alessandra, I believe this is what, in terms of the presentation, this is what we wanted to cover with you. But we do want to invite members of the public up if they would like to give comments, Chair, at your direction, and you're okay, so that they can give comments if they are so inclined on this part of the conversation. I do want to point out that we're talking about development standards and not necessarily anything related to changes in zoning for property. Right now, this conversation is even as development standards. But Chair, when you're ready, we can. I do have one request to speak by an individual, and we can invite them up when you're ready.
Yes, certainly. Let's open the floor for public comment.
Okay, go ahead. I'll ask afterwards. Go ahead.
Oops, excuse me. At this time, Letitia Arcuri, if you could please come to the podium.
Thank you. I know that this isn't the time because, like Kevin just said, my issue is about zoning, but I just wanted to step forward and to say that I appreciated the fact that I did get the postcard that was sent out to residents about the process that you're undergoing. And I wanted to come in here and be able to understand what it was that the process entailed, so that I could figure out how I could bring forth some issues that I'm experiencing right now with family members. So I'll wait to provide those comments because they're really addressing zoning requests. But I just want to say I appreciate the fact that we did get the postcard, and I wish there was more people that were taking an interest because this is an important process. So thank you for making it very easy to follow today's presentation. I'm not a planner, but I was able to understand it. So thank you.
And I just want to note that I've met with Letitia and a member of her family, and we've discussed their situation. They own property in northwest part of the city. They have interest in potentially, and it's currently in our very low density general plan designation, and I think they have interest perhaps with some surrounding property owners and having a conversation in the near future to talk about potential changes that they'd like to see for their properties. And I think it's something that when the timing is right, as we've discussed, we can have that conversation.
Thank you.
Thank you, Letitia. Okay, do we want to go over the next steps?
But before we do that, Chair, we do have some other members. I don't know if they have any desire to speak at this time. Okay, I just want to make sure. We did have some other members in the public, but they've indicated they don't have any desire to speak.
Certainly, the floor is open if anyone else would like to speak. And I think Commissioner Franz was starting to make another comment.
Yes, I did actually. I was trying to find where I put a little mark on the pages. So when I was reviewing the report that we received, there was a section, section E, it says site plan standards, and under that was number C. And it kind of caught my attention about sound walls. And it talks about that they would be prohibited, and it shall, and if a development has sound walls, it would provide frequent pedestrian and bicycle connections between the community and surrounding areas at a distance of no more than 600 feet. So maybe I'm not clearly understanding what this is trying to share. So when I think of sound walls, I think of, I don't know, let's think of Fred Waring. And when the city went in and built up that huge, I don't know if they're 6 or 8 feet tall walls to keep some of the sound from how big Fred Waring has gotten. And it's a much bigger road than it was when those houses were built. And so they're very big walls specifically to prevent, hopefully, some of the sound from the traffic. Or something like, I guess, Heritage Palms, they have their walls for their backyard. They do have a little bit of a setback there with some walking areas, but usually those walls are built in specifically around busy intersections, right? Jefferson, Miles, Fred Waring. So am I reading this right, that going forward, sound walls would be discouraged in the community, or what am I reading here?
So I'll give an initial response and I'll ask Alessandra and or Simran to weigh in. So in the general plan, we are discouraging walled communities, but we're not prohibiting them. And where they do occur, we are requiring pedestrian accessibility every 600 feet. That's a general plan policy. So that language is in part intended to address the general plan policy. And then Alessandra or Simran, do you want to weigh in with any additional comments?
Yes. So as Kevin mentioned, the general plan discourages gated communities, but doesn't prohibit them. So we haven't prohibited them in the code, but the general plan did have very specific direction on sound walls. So that section that you read on sound walls actually came directly from a policy that was in the general plan, but it only prohibits them on arterial, boulevard, connector, downtown, and local streets. So some of the really big, busy roads, they would still be allowed there, as I understand it.
That's my understanding as well in terms of what we've written. If you think, as an example, if you think that needs further clarification or explanation, again, this is the time to tell us your thoughts so that we can make sure to reflect that. If that was confusing to the commissioner and you think it might be confusing to a end user, a developer.
Yes. I think it should be clarified a little bit more, and maybe, say that on those main arterial roads that it is allowed there, but not in smaller community areas.
And the commission may remember that you and the council made a purposeful pivot away from gated communities because of the lack of connectability in the community that you saw over time as Indio, many of the communities in Indio were gated. So you didn't recommend, and the council didn't take it as far as to say no to gated communities, but they did say there needs to be connectability. So that's why, for example, in the Cocoa Palms project that you just reviewed, there is a condition of approval that in essence says exactly what we just discussed, that there needs to be pedestrian gates every 600 feet, because that is the general plan policy that project had to follow.
Kevin, quick question in regards to what you were just discussing. As far as sound walls and things like that being allowed, what you're describing as like heavy, traffic areas, is that based on traffic studies? Is that open to interpretation? Are there certain, like you mentioned, like Fred Waring or Miles, would that include like Avenue 42, Avenue 40? What dictates what we would consider being an acceptable area for such walls?
That's a great question, Chair. So earlier, Alessandra referenced arterial. So we have in our general plan designated, we have designations for different types of streets in our community. They range from a residential street that you might live on today to a collector, which is typically when you'll see a collector oftentimes that will gather the traffic from residential communities. So for example, a collector could be, I apologize, I'm blanking for the moment. A collector could be Adams on the west edge of the city, as an example, that collects traffic and filters it down to other parts of the city. Then you get into different types of arterials, and these tend to be our wider streets. This would be the Fred Waring, as an example, and or the Avenue 42 used as that reference earlier, Chair. So the goal is to tie it back to the general plan designated classifications for streets in our community. And Alessandra, please jump in.
Yes, I was looking back at the general plan to remind myself. So it has freeways, arterials, secondary highways, collectors, downtown streets, and local neighborhood streets. So as I understand it, the general plan was saying that sound walls would still be allowed on, say, freeways and secondary highways as identified in the general plan transportation element.
And I would also add major arterials, in our community as well. I believe that was the intent at that time. So again, the example of Fred Waring, that's a major east-west arterial, and we would still consider that, but not necessarily, for example, at least miles west of east of Monroe, you wouldn't see it there as an example. And you wouldn't see it necessarily on Avenue, sorry, that is an arterial. I was going to say Avenue 48, but that's the wrong one. I'll use our favorite street, Avenue 49. You wouldn't see them there.
Okay, if something exists to kind of show these designations, I'd love to see that just for reference.
I think it's a great comment, Chair. We'll work to refine that to be a little bit clearer and tie it back to the general plan more clearly, because I think in the future, folks would likely be asking the same questions you are.
Thank you so much.
So I want to remind you, this is just a study session. This evening is not your only chance. I know several, if not all of you, are waiting for hard copies. I've had a production issue with our printer, which we're working through, so I should have that for you. I do have the large scale zoning and general plan maps that were reviewed previously. I handed them out to the two commissioners in attendance, and we will mail them to the rest of the commissioners tomorrow. So you'll have those, and then I hope to be able to get those hard copies of the downtown specific plan and the general plan to you, hopefully by no later than midweek of next week. So you'll have that as well. But we encourage you to continue to look through these items. They're available on there is a zoning update webpage, which we referred to previously and directed you to. That is there. There is the interactive zoning map that Simone and Alessandra put together for you to be able to kind of travel the city and see how the zoning would be applied. And we're really trying to get as many of these great ideas that you've given us this evening, things to think about, out on the table now, so that when we get to those formal hearings in May, we know what your issue areas are, and we've had a chance to hopefully respond to them in a way that meets your expectations.
Can I make a request? Our next study session is that next week, right?
No, our next scheduled study session is April 13th.
Okay.
Actually, the schedule's just been put up on the screen. It should show up on your screens momentarily. So at the April 13th meeting, we will be discussing special uses, Article 4. We're kind of skipping or moving around because the consultant that's been helping us on that, Roger, who spoke to you about the sign code, he's been working on that, and based on his availability, we wanted to make sure that we got that in front of you. So we'll take a break before we jump into Article 3, which is the general development standards, and we'll spend some time on April 13th on special uses. And if there's any follow-up questions from today that you have, if you could let me know in advance, so that if we need to respond to something, we can also respond then. But the goal is really to focus on Article 4.
I'd like to request a hard copy of like this, so that was digital this time, for Article 4, like the Friday when it's released, because I really am old school. I like to like make notes, put stickies, and it's hard to do digitally. I'm just not that talented at my computer. So if I could get I'm willing to come pick it up, whatever, don't mail it. Yeah. But especially for these kinds of things, I would love to get hard copies, and I had a schedule.
So, and that's not a problem. We can actually, if any commissioner or the entire commission would like hard copies of the articles, we will get them to you. Probably do it in a notebook rather than bind them. We have lots of big notebooks here. We can do that for you. Does any other commissioners want hard copies of these articles?
Yes, I would.
Okay, so the chair does.
Yeah, I think
Vice Chair, you're shaking your head. Yes.
Yes. thank you.
Commissioner? It's a lot.
I'd rather just do the electronic.
Okay. All right. So right now, and I'll check with Commissioner Valdez on her preference as well. But we can certainly provide that to you, and we'll work to get that to you. Ideally, I should be able to get that to you before the next meeting. So does there other things that the consultant team or myself can address for you, or any other comments or questions you want to discuss with us? I would say this, what is being put in front of you is, and Simran used a very good term, a modern set of zoning regulations. This is where the world is today. The zoning regulations you've been exposed to are very old, and they do not represent Indio well, current Indio, because you have adopted a general plan, or the city as a council has adopted a general plan with your assistance that is intended to propel the city forward to a different future, a more urban future, and a more dense future, and a more connected future. So what you're seeing as we go through these is really a reflection of what you've already waited on. And well, the devil's in the details, as we said earlier. These details are really just a representation of what the general plan speaks to for what the Indio of today and tomorrow will be. And so I just want you to keep that in mind, that if you ever have questions, we'll answer them, but you may hear constant references back to the general plan, because that's the foundation we're building off of. And I don't know if Simran or Alessandra have any remaining comments they want to give.
I'll just say this was a very helpful discussion. We appreciate all the thought and the thoughtful questions and the time you put in reviewing the materials and asking such great questions. So thank you.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, so with that, we are done, Chair. And this was the only agenda item. However, we do have, before adjournment, we do always have our commissioner comments agenda item. So if the chair is ready, we could move to that agenda item.
Yeah, certainly. Do we have any commissioner comments for other items?
I would just like to say, Kevin, and I know that I reached out to you earlier this week about the commissioners being part of the APA, and I was just hoping that maybe you could announce it across, in case I know that we have some new folks, just as a option that we have.
Okay, no, that's a great, thank you, Vice Chairperson. So, but the Vice Chairperson had reached out. So the American Planning Association, which is a nationwide organization, and there are state chapters in every state and the District of Columbia. There is an opportunity for planning commissioners to join and be members, and the city would sponsor that. We have done that in the past. We're certainly, and the Vice Chairperson reached out asking about that. So if any other commissioners are interested in that, you can let me know now or separately through an email or a phone call, and we'll be happy to process a membership for you. What that does is it provides you with access to information that you can gather through emails, and there is blog posts, and there is newsletters. There's also online information, great online training opportunities. Many of them are free if you have an area you'd like to learn more about. And then there's also the opportunity to participate in conferences at a member rate versus a non-member rate. So if this is something the rest of the commissioners are in, just like I said, you can say right now, or you can let me know.
I thought I was already a member, unless my membership was canceled, but I still get some of their emails. So I don't know. I know Gloria too, right?
Yeah, me too. So,
Okay.
yeah.
So
Can we verify that we're still members?
it's an annual membership. So if it didn't get renewed through a payment of it likely means that you are no longer members.
Because it was done through the city. We didn't do anything.
And I know there's a conference coming up in San Diego.
Yeah, I think I saw it too.
Yeah, end of the month.
Soon. Yes.
End of April.
Yes.
That's the national conference. Yes. So what I will do, we will get. So far, I have 3 commission members. Chair, do you want to be signed up as well?
Yes, certainly. I believe likewise that I am or was, I still get several emails weekly.
So you have a member ID likely, but your account is probably inactive if we did not pay, which is likely the case. And so we will check, we will confirm that, and then we will take care of that on your behalf. And then I'll check with Commissioner Valdez as well regarding her interest. So we will address that for you. And again, that I do think it's a great exposure opportunity for you to learn more about the wonderful world of planning that you haven't already experienced here in India. So,
thank you, Kevin. Okay. Any other commissioner comments? Okay, then we will, I guess, adjourn to the next meeting, April 13th, which is a regular scheduled planning commission meeting, and we'll be including the study session along with regular items, correct, Kevin?
that is correct. We anticipate having 2 project consultations at this time, plus a study session. We don't believe we'll have any actual development, formal development review applications considered, but there are 2 project consultations, one for a commercial project and one for a residential project that I will be bringing to you. And I would just note that we will begin that meeting at our normal time, 6 p.m. on April 13th.
Okay, thank you. We'll adjourn this meeting until the next meeting on April 13th. Thank you, everyone.